Hello everyone, welcome back to MT10 News Vote 2020.
Tennessee has been a red state for over 2 decades, but could that be changing? Political analyst Kent Seiler is here to discuss.
And the COVID-19 pandemic has affected nearly every aspect of life, including voting. See how Tennessee voters have shown up at the polls this election cycle.
And a former Trump White House intern discusses her experience and political work.
Plus, the latest poll numbers from our data team. All that and more is coming up. MT10 News Vote 2020 starts right now.
Live from Studio One on the campus of Middle Tennessee State University, it's MT10's coverage of the 2020 election.
Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Terica Black.
And I'm Jonathan House. Welcome to MT10 News Vote 2020.
While the last voters in Tennessee are casting their ballots, it's time to look at what results we have coming in. Data reporter Jonas Saich and Dr. Ken Blake join us now.
Thank you, Terica. As always, thank you, Dr. Blake, for joining me this evening. You mentioned earlier, Jonathan, that Tennessee may have a chance to flip blue. No, especially not at the local level. And we're going to start with the Tennessee Senate update. That has already been called in favor of Bill Hagerty, 61.3% now as of about 20 minutes ago, 36.1% in favor of Marquita Bradshaw. You could see almost 1.5 million votes in that area. So the Senate race is clearly in control in favor of Bill Hagerty. Moving on to the next one in the House, Scott DesJarlais, if that has not been called, it surely will soon. He leads with over 2/3 of the vote. Hale with a 33.3% vote as well, over double of DesJarlais' votes, 200,000 compared to 100,000. So the House and Senate are both looking at the federal level to stay red. If you move on into the Senate district levels, Reeves is up 71% compared to Clemens' 28%. That's going to be in the state Senate, 58,000 votes compared to just 23,000. So these races not only are going red, but they're not really close to some of the blue. If you wanted to see some of those improvements, you would expect a 70-30, 65-35, but a lot of these are going into the 70s and even 80s in early reporting, as we saw with Hagerty early in the polls. Now we're going into the House districts. This one is House District number 34. Vaughn has a 39% chance. Rudd, 60%. Same deal here, 24,000, most likely going red. Most of the House districts, there's only one, and I believe that's 48, District 48, and we'll talk about that in a minute. That's close to flipping blue. District 34 is not exempt from that. Going on to District 37 in the House, you're going to see that Baum has a 58% lead over a 42% lead, or vote, from Phillips. 16,000 from Baum, 11,000 from Phillips. That's a little closer, as you can see in District 37. Not so much of a landslide that you can call it easy. Same deal in 48, as we'll talk about later. And actually right here, 61%, 38% for Ferry. It was a lot closer going early. Right now, you see Terry has that big lead, 18,000. He's up by over 7,000 votes going into District 48. Finally, District 49, this is the one we were talking about, 53% to 46%. This one could go either way. You could see some of these counties actually flip blue. Dr. Blake was talking about that earlier. Tennessee has primarily been a 3-county system for Democrats, usually in Nashville and Memphis. This could go flipped in favor of the Democrats, which would be a huge sign of momentum changing for Tennessee and the Democrats. However, on the federal level, no different for Republicans. Trump has already been declared. Those 11 electoral votes in Tennessee, 60.1% for Trump, 38.2% for Biden. About a little over 80% reported, 1.5 million votes for Trump. If we go to the federal level, though, that's where things get really interesting. You can see here Trump is down by almost 40 electoral votes. He leads the popular vote. If you notice, back in 2016, Hillary won that popular vote by almost 2%, and Trump won the electoral vote. Could we see something change here where the Democrats get that popular vote, or don't get the popular vote, but win the Electoral College? The only 2 times it has happened was, of course, in 2016 and in 2000 with Al Gore against Bush. Dr. Blake, could you see a chance where the popular vote and the electoral vote don't match?
Oh yeah, in fact, it happened the last time around, actually. Clinton won the popular vote, and of course Donald Trump won in the Electoral College, likewise in 2000. So it's not unexpected. Quick update, by the way. In the race for the U.S. House of Representatives in Tennessee, all the districts have now been called. Scott Desjardins has in fact won, been called the winner anyway in District 4. Cooper has held on to his seat in District 5, and Cohen is, both of these are Democrats, will return from District 9. Everybody else from Tennessee heading to the U.S. House is Republican. So basically, there's been no change in the Tennessee delegation to the U.S. House.
Dr. Blake, thank you as always. We thought we may see some shifts going on in Tennessee. It looks like all of the House and Senate races have officially been called for Republicans.
Not a lot of suspense here.
And as you can see on the federal level, 92-131, we'll keep that updated as the night goes along. Back to the desk.
Thank you, Jonas. Still ahead, Ken Seiler joins us to discuss Tennessee's political history.
And to look at how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the election. That's coming up next on MT10 News Vote 2020.
Sometimes, one moment changes everything. One song, one game, one adventure, one mission. For a child battling a critical illness, a wish come true can be a turning point. You can transform lives, one wish at a time. Support Make-A-Wish and help grant more life-changing wishes. Learn more at wish.org.
Everyone deserves a decent place to live.
Everyone.
Todos. Decent shelter is something we all need to thrive. When a future homeowner partners with Habitat for Humanity to build or improve a home,
Build.
they build a better future for themselves and their families.
For my family.
For my family.
For my family.
Para mi familia.
Your support empowers a family to help themselves.
Help.
Assiste.
Your support helps another family in your community or around the world achieve strength, stability, self-reliance.
Strength.
Fuerza.
With a little help, we all have the potential to stand on our own.
Potential.
Through shelter, we empower. Visit Habitat.org to provide help to families like these today.
With a surge in voter turnout, long lines have been the expectation. It's been 2 hours since polls closed here in Tennessee, but are there any voters still in line? Reporter Dave Stripling joins us now from the GOP Watch Party.
Actually, we went out to a couple of different places where we expected to see long lines outside of the polls and people running to get into line so that their vote would count. But actually, so many people voted early that it looked to be a pretty early night. Every place we went was locked up and already shutting the doors right at 7 o'clock. So since the GOP has done very well in this state, and the election has gone very smoothly, we've come on down to downtown Murfreesboro, 111 East Main Street, at the GOP headquarters, where they're going to have a big party tonight. Now, they've already been screaming every now and then as we hear certain GOP candidates here in Tennessee winning. Certain states are going to Trump, certain states are going to Biden, and right behind here is where the Republican Party here in Rutherford County is going to party and enjoy each one of those states, or maybe not. We'll see as the vote tallies come in. And apparently we have some surprises, some states like Pennsylvania that could still go either way. So it's looking like it may be a long night But we will check in once again at 10 o'clock from the inside of this Republican Party right here on the square in Murfreesboro. Dave Stripling for MT10 News.
By now, we all know what blue and red states are. Blue states typically vote more for Democrats, and red states typically vote more for Republicans. Tennessee may look like a deep red state in 2020, but has it always been this way? Reporter Dave Stripling has the story.
You'd think with 2 Republican senators, 7 Republicans to 2 Democrats in the House of Representatives, a Republican governor, and state government supermajorities, Tennessee might have been a so-called red state its entire history. But up until a few decades ago, Tennessee was a Democratic stronghold.
Tennessee was blue for a long time, well over a century.
Really up to around 2000, the way we voted in Tennessee was influenced by the Civil War, for over 100 years. If you lived in East Tennessee that sided with the Union, you were a Republican. If you were in Middle or West Tennessee and sided with the Confederacy, you didn't like Abraham Lincoln because he was a Republican, so you became a Democrat.
Then in the 1960s, social change and the civil rights movement started a shift in American politics. Conservatives whose families had long been Democrats became disillusioned with the party of FDR and Truman, and the Republican Party took full advantage of the anger across the Solid South.
Nixon's Southern strategy had a huge impact in Tennessee. Although there are multiple issues embedded in the shift, the Vietnam War, it was dominantly race. There's no question about it. Southern strategy played on Southerners' fears of the change in the racial structure in Tennessee.
Still, although most of the South turned deep red over the next 30 years, Tennessee was still a state that could go either way.
Tennessee had this reputation of a Howard Baker, of Al Gore Sr., the politicians who, regardless of their partisan stripe, were able to build bipartisan coalitions.
Tennessee had been kind of a swing state in presidential years.
Democrat Al Gore followed his father's famous footsteps and party affiliation into the U.S. House of Representatives in 1977, and then into the U.S. Senate in 1985, where he remained until Tennessee voters helped elect him vice president to Democratic President Bill Clinton in 1992. 7 years later, Gore failed to win the presidency after losing Tennessee.
2000, if Al Gore had been able to carry his home state, he would have been president. Florida would not have mattered.
So what exactly happened in that 8 years?
There was a wave of supermajority takeovers across the South.
Everyone was mad in 1994.
Certainly the Newt Gingrich shift was really big in Tennessee. There was a heavy focus on the Republican Party standing for business.
The wedge issues hurt the Democratic Party in rural areas: guns, abortion.
This shift from blue to red continued into 2010 with the election of Governor Bill Haslam, and then 2012 when Republicans won supermajorities in both Tennessee's state Senate and House of Representatives for the first time in more than a century.
These were yellow dog Democratic areas dating back to the 19th century, quite frankly. Were primed, ready for a partisan turnover.
You can drive down the streets in some of these rural counties and look at all the closed up shops. They didn't think that Democrats cared about them.
As a historic Tennessean, even though most Tennesseans would say that race has not been an issue in this shift, I would posit that it most assuredly has been.
Will Tennessee stay deep red? Only time and the next several elections will tell. Dave Stripling, MT10 News.
The volunteer state has quite an interesting voter history. Here to provide more context and analysis is Kent Seiler. He's a professor in MTSU's Department of Political Science and International Relations and is a political analyst for WSMV. Professor Seiler, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me, and it's very, very cool to see the WSMV news desk again. That's really cool, and it looks great.
Yes, sir. So, to begin, in 2018, then U.S. Representative Marsha Blackburn defeated former Governor Phil Bredesen with 54.7% of the vote to win the Senate seat left vacant with Bob Corker's retirement. With Hagerty defeating Bradshaw, is this evidence Tennessee will remain a deep red state in the near future?
Yeah, Tennessee is a deep red state, and I looked at some preliminary numbers tonight, and So far, I haven't seen any performance of Democratic candidates tonight in the state that would change that. It was a big victory for Senator-elect Bill Hagerty. You know, that was a big hill to climb for McQuita Bradshaw, but you know, so far I haven't seen a lot of good news for Tennessee Democrats.
Tennessee is heavily red. With other southern states like Georgia, which is leaning red as well, and Texas becoming toss-up states, why are we not seeing similar trends in Tennessee?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think they are more, Texas and Georgia are more demographically diverse states than Tennessee. And so they have a couple of things going for them there. You know, Tennessee has been trending conservative for many years now. And it just doesn't seem to be changing. You know, anytime I'm generally wrong about a political prediction, it's underestimating how red a state Tennessee is.
Was Marquita Bradshaw's primary win over DSCC endorsed James Mackler with far less campaign money a sign that blue parts of Tennessee are becoming more progressive and anti-establishment?
I think it is. You know, Marquita Bradshaw's victory in the primary was shocking to many Democrats. You had James Mackler, who was the establishment candidate. He had raised, $1.5 million. Marquita Bradshaw spent virtually nothing. She worked the grassroots, she worked the progressives, and she shocked the Democratic establishment. I think that as the Democratic numbers in Tennessee have dwindled, the ones that are left in the party tend to be more liberal, more progressive. It can help them win a primary. I don't know that it's the solution to get back to winning generals.
Mr. Ken Seiler, the Democratic Party and political left have seen a divide in ideology between the progressive ideas of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders, and the more traditional centrist approach by Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden. This divide is hurting Democrats on a national and state level, especially in Tennessee. Which regions do you see shifting ideologically in future elections as people continue to migrate to Tennessee from other states?
Yeah, it's really hard to tell where that goes. You know, Marquita Bradshaw was not a traditional Democratic candidate. You know, Phil Bredesen was, run the moderate, try to see if there's a political middle. This was kind of an opportunity to say, okay, let's run someone from the left and see what happens. The results were no better or potentially worse. So I don't know what the solution is for Tennessee Democrats. It is a very, I'm sure, confounding situation for most Democrats. Now, I do want to look at, Rutherford County, Murfreesboro, and see, are there any cracks in that red wall? Let's look at some of how those Democratic candidates performed, inside the city. Maybe there's something happening there that's, making it a little lighter red, but, that's what we'll do analyzing these returns over the next few days.
Definitely. All these things are considered and noted in this election. Mr. Ken Seiler, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. And again, everything looks great. You make us all proud to be affiliated with MTSU. Good work.
We try our best. Thank you so much. Still ahead on MT10 News, COVID-19 changed the way people vote. Reporter Tommie Curry has the story.
The choice between mail-in or in-person voting was more important than ever this year. See how voter turnout changed due to COVID-19. That's coming up next on MT10 News Vote 2020.
Battles aren't won solely on the field. That's a common misconception. Battles are won within, over enemies of fear, enemies of doubt. In that place where promises are kept. Promises to oneself. Promises to one's community. Promises to one's country. In the heart of every Marine, you'll find a promise. A promise forever kept. A promise of battles won.
You may have heard about the new federal budget proposal. Let's say this dollar represents the whole budget, 100 pennies. This penny here saves millions of lives. It prevents people from starving when famine hits, and it keeps kids like me in school instead of being forced to marry. It's the U.S. Foreign Assistance budget. All those poor people. I think they're worth the penny. Foreign assistance is worth the penny.
I call you and say, I'm with the IRS. You owe back taxes, and if you don't pay today, you're going to jail. You can fix this by sending cash. Did you actually believe me? Too smart to fall for it? Well, last year, Americans paid $100 million to guys like me. 1 in 6 people were scammed. Can you believe it? Well, you shouldn't. I just made that up, too. You are a little gullible.
Tennesseans have made history for early voting. After 14 days of the early voting, over 2 million Tennesseans cast their ballots at polls in person. Over 200,000 Tennesseans sent absentee ballots to local election commissions. 51% of all registered Tennessee voters voted during early voting, a 36% increase from 2016. The percentage is very close to the number of Tennessee voters that voted in the election 4 years ago. Tennessee's highest total turnout for a presidential election was in 2008, where 66% of all registered voters turned up to the polls. This election is poised to break voting turnout records across the state.
Early voting, day of, or mail-in. Each voting option was a way to share your voice in this year's election, but one of these options had a major increase. Reporter Tommie Curry has the story.
This year's election has more people voting than during the primary votes due to past and current events. MTSU's Director of American Democracy Project for Civic Learning, Dr. Mary Evans, explains why there is so much encouragement to vote this year.
It's as though individual Americans' rights have been just skipped over in favor of the super wealthy, and Americans see that, they feel that.
Early voting had less of an outcome this year than it did in the past due to the virus, which caused the increase for mail-in ballots.
A lot of folks are feeling very physically at risk. Many folks are absolutely at risk. Also, many folks are quarantined and can't get out. Many folks care for older folks and can't get out. So there are all sorts of reasons why mail-in voting is up this year.
For a mail ballot to have been counted, it must have had a signature and received by your county election commission before Election Day. Dr. Evans explains how these ballots are protected.
Those ballots are then put under secure lockbox with both county commissioners of both Democratic and Republican parties having keys and access to them.
MTSU is a part of the National Study of Learning and Voting Engagement, where you can see the numbers of voting progress. In 2016, an estimate of 44% of the student body voted. 2018, there was a 23%. If that same increase happens this year, it will be an estimate of 70%. Reporting for MT10 News, I'm Tommie Curry.
Still ahead on MT10 News, we have a very special guest for you all. Claire Barnett is a former 2-time Trump White House intern.
She'll talk her experience in the Trump White House and how she's continuing work in politics. That's coming up next on MT10 News Vote 2020.
Patty here. Why should you include avocados as part of your family's balanced diet? It's as simple as 1, 2, 3. Number 1.
Avocados fill you up.
Avocados contain unsaturated fats, good fats your body needs to help with the absorption of key nutrients.
Me hungry right now.
Number 2.
Avocados are good for you.
Avocados are naturally cholesterol and sodium free, plus they contain nearly 20 vitamins and nutrients.
Me need vitamins and nutrients. And number 3, avocado delicious.
Try avocados in place of ingredients higher in saturated fat. Avocados taste great in sandwiches, salads, and even in baked goods like cookies.
Avocado cookies? This match made in heaven.
This is your new kitten, or your new puppy. Every day, 70,000 puppies and kittens just like them are born in the U.S. Cute, right? Well, what's not cute is that half of all litters are accidents. And when a kitten has a litter of oopsies and a puppy has a litter of uh-ohs, pretty soon you have thousands and thousands of OMGs. And that leads to millions of pets being killed in shelters each year. But if 80% of pet owners say they believe in spaying and neutering, then what gives? Well, it turns out those sweet little fuzzballs can get pregnant sooner than you think. A lot sooner. But here's the good news. You can stop the accident before it happens. You just have to remember one number. 4, as in 4 months. When you bring home Maggie or Ruby or Puddle or Clyde, get them fixed at 4 months. It can be old enough to get pregnant, and it's definitely young enough to make a difference. Prevent more, fix at month 4.
One of the most watched demographic groups for this year's election is the 18 to 29 range. Early voting showed that the youngest eligible voters across the country have shown up at the polls. With more young people getting involved in politics, we turn to our final guest of this show, Claire Barnett. She is the former 2-time Trump White House intern and is currently the communications coordinator at Vanderbilt University's Fritch Center for Autism and Innovation. Joining us to discuss her past and current work in politics, Claire Barnett, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here with you guys.
We're excited to have you. So to begin, I know everyone is wondering, me included, what was your experience as an intern in the White House during Trump's first 2 years in office?
You know, what's bizarre about being a White House intern is that in some ways it feels like you're in a movie, but in others it's just like going to work every single day. And I spent one summer as a photography intern, so that was very hands-on, and I spent a lot of time, in particular, attending events with Ivanka Trump and covering those meetings or those appearances. And the second summer, I was a communications intern, so it was a lot more office-based, and I was in the office of the vice president, and so about once a week, he'd walk through and check up on everybody. And so in some ways, you feel like you're just in a typical intern position where you're answering emails and you're making sure that everybody has the background research they need. But then you see these people who make game-changing decisions for the whole world kind of wander through, and it makes you realize that everybody's sort of just human, even the people that we sometimes deify or villainize as politicians.
Wow.
Has your opinion of President Trump changed since you first interned at the White House to now?
In some ways it has. I think I've always thought that personal integrity matters in a leader, and I think President Trump is brash, and a lot of people would not consider him to be really thoughtful or respectful of people he disagrees with. And so while that was really off-putting to me in the beginning, working at the White House made me realize that the person at the top of the ticket is not hardly as relevant as you think, because what they really do is they hire the thousands of people in agencies in the White House itself that will then make decisions based upon a liberal or a conservative approach to policy making and what's best for the country. And so I think my thoughts about President Trump have changed in such that I'm less concerned about personally who he is. And I think it matters if you're ever unkind to someone, or for example, the time that he mocked that disabled reporter, that really troubled me as someone who works in disability advocacy now. But I've noticed, having looked at it from the inside, that what really matters are the people that are hired, and that voting based on your philosophy is going to be more productive than voting based on the top of the ticket.
Yeah, so Claire, you are the communications coordinator for Vanderbilt University, Fritch Center for Autism and Innovation. Tell us how you got involved there and what your mission is in this position ultimately.
Absolutely. So the Fritch Center is very unique. We are at the intersection of research and disability advocacy, and there is something inherently political about autism advocacy because there are some very strong opinions on the best way to advocate for autistic people and the things that are needed. And the way I got into it is that as an undergraduate student at Vanderbilt, I got an autism diagnosis. And I said, wow, there are so many people who don't understand that someone like me can be on the spectrum. I was a woman, I had gotten into Vandy on my own, so I hadn't had any academic difficulties, but I still inhabited the traits of autism. And actually just literally earlier today, also confirmed an ADHD diagnosis I've been looking into for months. And so a lot of the advocacy I do as the communications coordinator is talking to businesses and local leaders to help them understand that what we call neurodivergent people, so people with autism, dyslexia, ADHD, dysgraphia, are not just charity cases, but we're individuals that have really valuable strengths and that the workforce is missing out on those strengths when we're sort of cut out in an interview process.
So you recently did a TED Talk discussing the underemployment rate of college-educated autistic adults. Are there any policies, laws, or initiatives you would like to see enacted by the next president and Congress to combat this issue?
That's a fascinating question because if there's one thing I've realized, it's that when the government mandates you hire a certain demographic, it very rarely changes attitudes about that demographic. And so I would suggest that what we really need to see is not so much a new law saying that, you know, autistic people should represent 1 to 5% of your company, but to actually see more of that social power of the office of leaders in our government saying, it's a business imperative that you don't leave out these talented individuals whenever you're recruiting. And, you know, something as simple as a tweet from the president could have a bigger impact, especially on conservative voters around the country in accepting neurodiversity. That could have a much bigger impact than another law about, you know, a certain quota that has to be met. And so I would argue that instead of a policy, it is those broader initiatives and that sort of societal level advocacy that makes a much bigger impact.
Well, Claire, we really appreciate your insights and raising awareness on issues that we typically don't speak about. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Coming up next on the 10 p.m. show, see how a Tennessee college student played a big part in the Democratic National Convention.
And a record voter turnout for the youngest eligible voting bloc. We'll see what issues brought college students to the polls.
Plus, an update on the latest results from our data team. Thank you for joining us. I'm Terica Black.
And I'm Jonathan House. While we're off the air, we're going to toss it to Cheddar U. We'll see you back at 10 p.m. here on MT10 News Vote 2020.